Welcome back. Thanks for being here. Today I figured I would go kind of in depth on the spotted lanternfly since this is a topic that keeps coming up in the media because it's kind of the season that we see them around, especially last month. Um, they were just everywhere. So I figured I would talk somewhat about their biology and why they're so bad and what you can expect as far as their spread. But first, please like and subscribe, leave some comments. I like talking to you guys. Um, doesn't cost you anything, so don't be stingy. Like everything, subscribe to everything. It helps me out quite a bit, and it's just great getting to talk to people who also like bugs. So this beauty here is the spotted lanternfly, and it is currently invading the eastern half of the United States. So if you're on the East Coast, you're probably already very familiar with this guy. They are fairly large and fairly pretty, really. They have these speckled outer wings, and their underwings are bright red. They're actually quite beautiful. It's a shame that they don't have, a better reputation. I always say, why can't we have like an invasive, beautiful butterfly? Why does everything have to be so ugly? Well, now we actually have a beautiful insect. It's still invasive, and everyone hates it anyway. So I guess I was wrong. But these guys are originally from China, where they're not generally a huge problem because of natural enemies, but like all invasive insects, one of the big problems about why they're so invasive is that they don't have any of their natural predators or parasites or diseases in their new habitat. So they can grow exponentially and feed until they reach such an enormous population that the environment can no longer support them with the amount of food that they need, and then you see a drop in the population. And invasive species tend to go through this boom and bust cycle, or invasive animals rather, tend to go through this boom and bust cycle of just reproducing to enormous quantities and then dying off from lack of disease or from lack of food because of lack of disease and predators and things like that. And then they rebound and they get huge again. It's a very annoying problem. They do an enormous amount of environmental and economic damage in the process. This particular bug is a plant hopper, so it feeds on the sap of plants. And because of this, it doesn't face a huge disease pressure. Even in its native area, it's generally controlled by parasitic wasps. But in the US, it has very little that's actively attacking it. They are known to feed on an enormous number of plants. They have an association with 173 plus plants. So it has 173 plus hosts, but that number tends to decline as they age. So it's the babies that feed on the most number of things, and then the adults get more specific in what they like. And I don't know how accurate that is. I'm sure there is some truth to this, but at least around me, the most commonly fed on hosts that I see are oak trees, and they are on oak trees in enormous numbers. Whereas theoretically, the adults are supposed to really like Tree of Heaven, and we'll get into that in a minute, which they do. But I think they may be adapting to other hosts the longer they are in the United States. So they've been in the U.S. for quite some time. In 2014, it was confirmed that they had invaded Pennsylvania, but it is likely that they were here several years before that. Official estimates say something about 2012. So it's been, at this point, what is that, 12 years? But generally speaking, with invasive insects, they tend to be in an area between 5 and 10 years before they are recognized and detected. And the reason for that is it requires that much time for the population to build up large enough that people start taking notice of them. With the spotted lanternfly, each female can lay about 100 eggs, so they can reproduce fairly quickly. So it's possible that it was only here for 2 years, but most likely it was here for a little longer than that. We can probably confirm it going into like old trap captures and actually looking through it and finding a few of them in 2012, but it's likely that it was here a little longer than that. Like I said, they came over from China, probably accidentally imported on cargo. And because they have an enormous host range and they are very cold tolerant. They have had no problem invading into the northeastern United States because there's lots of food and there aren't any predators or parasites. So its life cycle is fairly simple. The eggs actually are required, or the eggs require cold temperatures to stop something called diapause. So there is this, diapause is this very common process in insects in which one life stage goes into kind of a perpetual hibernation. And in this case, it occurs in the eggs. And there's generally some sort of environmental factor that is required to break this hibernation. It is usually either temperature or daylight hours. So whatever the hibernating stage is requires a certain amount of sunlight on it directly a certain number of hours a day in order for it to break this hibernation. Or more commonly, if it's especially for egg stages, it requires a certain number of weeks below a certain temperature to break this hibernation called diapause. And so the eggs need several weeks at very cold temperatures in order to hatch. If the temperature never drops below that threshold, the eggs will never hatch. They can never break out of this hibernative state. So the eggs overwinter in that state. So they actually need a cold winter in order to develop properly. And then once the winter is over, the first instars, so this number refers to the instar. And an instar is just a developmental stage between molts for an insect. For most advanced insects, the number of instars is fixed before it reaches adulthood. For the spotted lanternfly, there are 4 juvenile instars and then the adult instar. For more primitive insects, the number of instars isn't particularly fixed. But for the ones that you're most familiar with, the number of instars is definitely fixed. So the first instars hatch out of the eggs, usually after the winter thaws. So you're talking about like March or April, and then they begin feeding. And they go through a series of molts until they reach the adult stage. Technically, or at least what the papers say, is that this occurs through the spring, and then the adults are usually flying around come July. And then the adults will mate in mostly August, September, lay a bunch of eggs on trees, and then those eggs diapause through the winter. And the adults are theoretically supposed to all die. In my personal experience, this is not what happens. The adults, a certain number of the adults appear to survive the winter. What I have read is the adults, although they are very cold tolerant, they should all be dead by New Year's. But this year in particular, it was really bad in my area. I'm in Maryland, and I saw those adults crawling around in April. And there's no way that these juveniles developed into the adult stage fast enough by only having been hatched out for less than a month, maybe. But there were some adults active in April, and by May and June, there were a lot of adults. Too many for the new population to have already hatched and matured into adults. I think that there is some fraction of the adult population that probably survives in either the leaf litter or in some sort of hibernative state on the trees, but there is no way that I was seeing adults in March and April that had freshly developed. It's just not possible. And then there was a second boom in the adult population. The adult population started to kind of, in my experience this year, started to decrease as the summer got on, and then suddenly there was a big boom in the adult population at the beginning of August. And that's what I think this process was undergoing, this natural development. But I suspect that there is a subpopulation that is incredibly cold tolerant and survives the winter, although I haven't been able to find proof of it yet. As far as literature evidence of it, but this is the way that the life cycle goes, because we'll get into because of the hosts. An enormous number of these are generated. So this is frequently what I see unlike oak trees. This particular tree is a um, red maple, but tree of heaven is frequently covered like this. But the adults tend to congregate in huge numbers on the bark of trees. And you can see the red underwing on some of these. They were probably pecked at by birds or whatever. And they're very, very large insects. So they are easy to spot once you know what you're looking for. If you're at a distance, you probably won't see the individual insects unless you come at them from a good angle. What I usually do if I'm looking for these guys is I try to get them at an angle where they are standing on the side of the tree. So if I'm trying to collect these or whatever, I will walk around the oak trees around me because they do this for whatever reason on the oak trees around me. And until I can get them in profile against the sky, and then they're really easy to spot because they aren't camouflaged in. And then once you see one from a distance like this, you can go to the tree and collect them off the tree. And they are very easy to collect because while they're on the tree like this, they're generally feeding, so they have their mouth parts embedded. And they're pretty slow, especially if it's starting to get dark. So you can just walk up to the tree and pick them off the tree. It's not a difficult task at all. And when I say their mouth parts, they don't chew like you would think like a grasshopper chews. If we zoom in here, their mouth is for piercing and sucking because they feed on sap. This, I'm going over the top edge of it, and then now at the bottom edge, this is their mouth. It is a needle-like structure. I talk about this in my morphology series if you want to go over there and learn about this in the mouth part section. They have this needle-like structure that they can use to pierce into the bark of trees or through the skin of the branches of other plants, and that's how they suck out their nutrients. And then if you're looking up here, these are their weird little antennae, their little orange antennae. Here are their eyes. So once you get a kind of a bearing on them, their head is kind of a weird trapezoid shape with this long spindly mouth coming off of it. But they're usually on the trees feeding at this stage, and they're easy to pick off if you want to collect them for your own collection, or if you want to kill them or whatever. They're easy to get at this point. And this is also where they will lay their eggs. The females will lay masses of eggs covered in a mud-like substrate that camouflage in with the tree. So if you are worried about lots of these on your property, you can go through and just take a paint scraper and scrape the egg masses off and destroy them that way. And then you'll have fewer next year. So where are these now, and where are they going? So they are currently in the eastern United States. They started in Pennsylvania. They rapidly spread. There are now subpopulations as far west as Michigan, Illinois, and Ohio, and they are spreading very quickly. They're already spreading up north. I think I saw a report of them now being in Connecticut, and they'll keep going north. And then south, they'll go until it gets too hot. So if you live in a state where you don't have a harsh winter, or if it doesn't get below 0 degrees Fahrenheit during the winter, the eggs can't break diapause, so you probably won't be dealing with these because they probably won't be able to survive. But the USDA did produce a map of where it is likely this is to be the worst. So if we go over to the US, you can see that the eastern United States is kind of just forfeit, and part of this is from the hosts, but also good climate. So red is where the infestation will be the worst, and then it lightens through yellow to green. The mountains of California are going to be kind of overtaken eventually, but you can see that the population starts to decline once you go south, and once you get to like Florida and Texas, it's just too hot. They're not going to survive there. And then with these other locations, it's possible that it's too cold in some of these locations, and then there's not appropriate hosts in some of these locations. Generally speaking, if you have a winter that is really cold, like they do in Minnesota, where you routinely get below -25, it's possible that it's just too cold and it will freeze the egg solid. That is kind of the saving grace for the northern plains and the Rocky Mountains and stuff. For other countries, This is all kind of X'd out because they're not going to be able to survive in the tropics. It's just not cold enough. But South America, in Argentina, Chile, uh, Uruguay, things like that, that's going to be a problem. All of Europe, for the most part, is forfeit. Parts of South Africa, it's cold enough. This is its native range here in China and Korea and part of Japan. And then southern Australia, it is cold enough for this. But why is it spread? Why does it survive so well? Why is the infestation so bad in the eastern United States right now? And the answer to that is the tree of heaven. So this is the tree of heaven. This is why it's so bad. And we will get into this. So this is Ailanthus altissima, the tree of heaven. This was brought in intentionally as a garden plant. So tree of heaven. And it escaped because it is incredibly invasive. It can reproduce through a cloning strategy where, one, it produces seeds, but it can also clone itself. So it will send out little rootlets and make clones of itself, and then you'll get new trees next to these trees. So they're very, very hard to kill. It can spread very, very quickly. It produces an enormous number of seeds. This tree was brought into Europe in the 1700s and then brought over into the US in the late 1700s. And it has colonized an enormous portion of the United States, probably the entire United States. And this is a tree from China and happens to be a favorite host of the spotted lanternfly. Now, the spotted lanternfly has like 173 hosts, but it loves this tree. And if you have this tree on your property, this is where the major portion of the infestation is likely to be coming from. It particularly likes to lay its eggs on this tree. It is a very easy tree to recognize. It has these very long, kind of teardrop-shaped leaves. The leaves are about the size of your hand. It has white flowers, which do not smell nice. And it produces these panicles of white flowers. And then in the fall, it produces these extremely bright red seed pods. And you can see how big these leaves are, kind of, pointed, super pointed. They're usually pretty droopy. They're very easy to identify. This is the tree of heaven, and they grow everywhere, especially in really terrible soil. So even if you're not like in a particularly great place for trees because you have like a lot of sandy soil or whatever, this guy will still spring up when you're not looking. And if you want to control your spotted lanternfly populations, you have to control this tree. It produces an enormous amount of sap that the spotted lanternflies, love to feed on. They preferentially lay their eggs on this because it is a great host for the young, and the eggs blend in with the bark really well. But additionally, this tree is a major host for another annoying invasive insect that if you are in the Northeast, you are very familiar with, the brown marmorated stink bug. These are those stupid stink bugs that get into your house every fall in enormous numbers. This guy is also from China, showed up in like 2009-ish, and also loves the tree of heaven. So if you want to be able to control these invasive insects, you really need to get this tree off your property. They can get pretty large, but they're usually pretty scrubby. They can get like 50 feet tall, but again, they just don't generally get huge because they generally grow in bad conditions. And because of their cloning ability, they're really hard to control. So you will likely have to check your property year after year after year to get rid of this. There is a bunch of research going on for the control of tree of heaven using pathogens, soil pathogens, to kill it, but no success thus far, and you're better off at this point just cutting the damn things down. But that is the spotted lanternfly. If you have questions about its general biology, feel free to leave some comments and I'll get back to you as fast as I can. But again, like and subscribe, leave some comments. Love talking to you, and I'll see you guys later.